Every morning, Nora Bellamy forgot him. And every morning, Elliot Shaw stood on her porch and made himself ready to make her fall in love again. He always came early, before the heat found the lake. The boards under his boots were already warm from the first light, and the whole hillside smelled of it. Cut grass, warm cedar. The faint green sweetness of the honeysuckle pip had let grow wild over the railing. In one hand he held a paper bag gone translucent at the bottom with butter. In the other, a single stem of cornflower, blue as a struck match, because Nora had told him once, 100 mornings ago, a woman who no longer existed by nightfall, that cornflowers were the only blue that didn't try too hard. She would not remember telling him. That was the whole shape of his life now. He knocked, 2 knuckles, soft, the way you knock when you don't want to frighten the person on the other side. Feet crossed the kitchen. The bolt turned, and Pip's face appeared in the gap, 24 years old and already fluent in the particular tiredness of loving someone who kept slipping downstream. "She's up," Pip said. She looked at the bag, then the flower, then his face, and her mouth did the dry little twist that passed, in that house, for good morning. She's read the letter. She's at the stage where she thinks we're all being very calm about something enormous, which, to be fair to her, we are. How is she? Suspicious, beautiful, furious that no one told her it was August. Pip stepped back to let him in. She asked me who keeps leaving cornflowers in the blue jug. I said the milkman. She said we don't have a milkman. I said times are hard. She lowered her voice. "Go slow, Elliot. Yesterday you went too fast and she cried, and then she forgot why, and then she was just a person crying in a kitchen with no reason, and that's worse." "I know. I know you know." She squeezed his arm once, quick, and was gone up the stairs, because Pip had learned that the first 10 minutes were not for witnesses. The kitchen was full of mourning. Long bars of light lay across the scrubbed table, and dust turned in them, slow as plankton. There were flowers everywhere, because there were always flowers, buckets of them on the flagstones. Dahlias and sweet peas and cosmos going soft at the edges, the sugared water smell of them thick enough to lean on. And there, at the table, in a man's shirt with the sleeves shoved up, one bare foot tucked under her, was Nora. She looked up, and there it was. The thing he had never learned to survive. Her eyes moved over him, his face, the flower on his cuff, the bag, the flower, with open. Friendly, total blankness, no history in them at all. He was the first page of a book she had never read. "Hello," she said, wary and polite. "You're not the milkman." "No," he held very still. "I brought pastries. Almond. There's one with too much sugar on it. That one's yours." "Is it?" She didn't move. Her hand was around a mug of tea gone cold, and her thumb pressed a slow arc against the china. "You know a lot about my sugar tolerance for a man I have genuinely never seen in my life." He had promised himself long ago that he would never lie to her in this hour. It was the one rule that kept the whole impossible thing decent. "You've seen me," he said. "You just don't keep it. There's a letter. You wrote it. In your own hand. It'll say a man named Elliot comes in the mornings, and that you don't owe him anything, and that you can send him away whenever you like." He set the bag on the table, unhurried, and laid the cornflower beside it. "I fix old boats down at the yard. You sell flowers on the harbor on market days. We met on the ferry 2 summers ago because you were late and I was slow, and you have decided, on and off ever since, that I am worth the bother." He pulled out the chair across from her, but didn't sit. "You don't have to decide it again today. But I'd like the chance to be worth the bother." For a long moment there was only the lake outside, and a boat's halyard slapping its mast somewhere, and the drone of a single fat bee working the honeysuckle at the sill. Then Nora reached out, took the flower, and turned it in the light. "Cornflower," she said. "It's the only blue that doesn't try too hard." She said it like her own idea, because to her it was. She did not see the small thing that happened in his face. "All right, boatman. You've got until the tea's warm." She nudged the second mug toward the pot, which, since it's stone cold, is not long, and Elliot Shaw sat down and began again. He got her to laugh once, a real one, surprised out of her by something small he said about the bee, whom he had named, and for the length of that laugh the day was as bright as any day they had ever had. But he already knew the arithmetic. Tonight she would sleep, and the current would come, and she would wake tomorrow with the table swept clean of him. Whatever he built here, in this warm hour, he built on water. That was the part no letter could explain. Not why she forgot, not how it had started, and not why a man would choose to spend himself every single morning courting a woman who would never once remember being loved. To understand that, you had to go back to the ferry. 2 summers before, Elliot Shaw had believed his life was full because it was quiet. He rose with the lake, worked with his hands until they ached in the good way, and went home to a rented cottage where nothing waited for him but the smell of linseed oil and the ticking of a clock he'd never bothered to fix. He was 32 then, and he had made a small, careful religion out of needing no one. And he mistook the peace of it for happiness, the way you can mistake a held breath for calm. The morning it broke open, he was late for the 7 o'clock ferry, with a rudder assembly wrapped in sacking across his knees, and he'd taken the last space on the bench under the wheelhouse, and he had been, by his own honest account, in a foul and self-satisfied mood. Then the whole world arrived at once, on 2 legs, in a yellow dress, dragging 4 zinc buckets of flowers, and losing a war with the gangway. "Hold! Hold the boat! Hold it! I'm nearly on!" She hauled the first bucket up the ramp, water slopping over her sandals, and the ferryman had already reached for the rope. "Don't you dare cast off, Sunil. I can see you deciding to." 6:58, Nora, the ferryman called back, delighted, casting off not 1 inch. "You're a ghost of a woman who is always almost on time." Elliot did not decide to help her. That was what he told himself afterward, when he was trying to locate the exact moment his careful life had sprung a leak. He simply found himself off the bench and down the deck. Taking 2 buckets out of her hands before he had chosen to, the cold water soaking his sleeve, the raw green stink of cut stems and river slime everywhere. "I've got them," he said, gruff, because gruff was his native language. She looked up at him then, actually looked, the way she looked at everything, as if it might turn out to be interesting, and she wanted to be ready. She had freckles thrown across her nose like someone had shaken cinnamon at her, and a smudge of soil on her jaw, and she was laughing at herself, breathless, entirely without shame. "You've got them," she agreed. "You've also got, I'm afraid, a permanent obligation. My grandmother's rule: carry a woman's flowers once and you're responsible for her forever." She dumped the last bucket by the rail and stuck out a wet hand. "Nora Bellamy, I already like you better than Sunil, which isn't hard, because Sunil left me on a jetty in the rain in April. You were 40 minutes late in April," Sunil called serenely. "I was mourning something. You were buying a bun." "I was mourning something and buying a bun." Elliot shook her hand. It was cold and calloused, and it gripped his like she meant it. "Elliot," he said, and then, because she was waiting with her whole open face for more, and because the word came up out of him unbidden, he added, "Shaw, I fix boats." "Of course you do." She surveyed him, the sacking bundle, the oil-dark hands, the shoulders, with frank approval. "You have exactly the hands for it. I trust hands more than faces. Faces lie constantly. Hands can't be bothered. The ferry shuddered out into open water, and the town slid loose behind them. White houses tumbling down to a harbor bright with masts. The lake beyond it hammered silver by the early sun. Nora braced herself against the rail and lifted her face into the wind and sighed like a woman coming home to a house she loved. God, look at it. I have lived here my entire life, and it robs me blind every single morning. Do you ever get used to it? No, he said. It surprised him how quickly the truth came. Good, don't. People who get used to beautiful things are the saddest people alive. She reached into the nearest bucket and pulled out a single blue stem, dripping, and, without ceremony, without asking, threaded it through the top buttonhole of his work shirt, her knuckles brushing his collarbone, matter-of-fact as a florist and devastating as a verdict. There, cornflower, it's the only blue that doesn't try too hard. Now you match the water, and you owe me for the flowers, so you'll have to see me again to settle up. That's also my grandmother's rule. Your grandmother had a great many rules. She was a great many woman. The ferry's horn answered a horn across the water, and Nora grinned at him sideways, wind pulling her hair loose. And Elliot Shaw felt the held breath of his whole careful life go out of him for good. So, boatman, what are you so grumpy about at 7 a.m. that a stranger had to fix it for you? He did not have an answer that fit into words. He had an answer that took 2 summers. He saw her every market day after that, and then on days that were not market days, which he invented reasons for. He learned her the way he learned an old hull, slowly, with his hands, respecting what was already there. He learned that she made lists on everything. The backs of receipts, the skin of her own wrist, ferry timetables annotated in 3 colors. Because a mind as quick as hers threw off more thoughts than it could hold, and she decided long ago to trust ink over memory. He would tease her about it. He would come to understand, later, that it had been the truest thing about her, and that some part of her had always known. He learned she had lost their mother young. She and Pip both so young that Nora carried it not as grief, but as a fact of weather, a thing that had always been true of the sky. It was their father who had raised them on the lake, a ferryman himself before Sunil, and it was their father's stubbornness she'd inherited, the refusal to be left on any jetty by anything. He learned that under all the brightness she was braver than anyone he'd met, and that the brightness was not a lie she told to cover the bravery, but the shape the bravery took. And he learned, on a green evening in their first August, standing in the doorway of her flower room, with the whole lake going pink behind him, and the air thick with the peppery smell of stock and the drone of the last bees, that he had stopped being able to imagine a single morning he did not want to spend near her. "You've gone quiet," Nora said, not turning from the bench where she was binding a bridal spray, her fingers moving without her, the waxy snap of stems the only sound. "You do that. You go into your workshop in your head and pull the door to. I always want to knock." She tied off the twine with her teeth. "Knock, knock. Elliot Shaw." "What's in there?" He crossed the room. He took the flowers out of her hands and set them down, the way he'd taken the buckets on the ferry, before he'd decided to, and he turned her by the shoulders to face him, and for once in his cautious life he did not reach for the careful word. "You," he said. "It's you in there. It's been you since the ferry, and I've been standing at the door of it like a fool ever since, and I'm done standing." Her eyes had gone very wide and very still. Outside, a fish rose and fell, one soft note in the dusk. "I don't have your gift for saying things. I'll get it wrong. But I'd rather spend the rest of my life getting it wrong out loud than one more day getting it right in silence." So, Nora Bellamy. His voice caught, and he let it. I owe you for the flowers. I'd like to take the rest of my life to settle up." For a moment she didn't move, and he thought, with the old cold reflex of a man who had trained himself to expect little, that he had misjudged the whole tide of it. Then Nora Bellamy laughed, wet and astonished, and grabbed a pen off the bench and seized his hand and wrote across the back of it in ink that would not wash off for days, "Mine." Underlined twice. "There," she said, fierce, her eyes shining. "Now it's written down. And I trust ink over everything." She pressed his inked hand flat against her heart and held it there, and he could feel it going like something trying to get free. And she said the only vow either of them ever made. "Don't you dare get used to me." "Never," he said. "God help me. Never. They had 11 months. He did not like to number them afterward, because a number made it sound finished, and nothing about it was finished. That was the cruelty and, later, the strange mercy of it. They were 11 months into the rest of their lives. He'd all but moved his tools to the yard nearest her cottage. They'd argued about whether a boat could be a wedding venue, seriously, with a diagram. She had started leaving lists that were addressed to him. "Buy the good coffee. Kiss me before you say anything about my hair. Remember you promised to teach me to splice a rope and you have not, liar." And he had started keeping them, all of them, in a tin, because he was a man who had spent 30 years throwing nothing away and finally had something worth the habit. It was the last week of the following July when it happened, and it happened the way these things do, with no music, on an ordinary wet evening that no one had marked as important. She'd stayed late at the harbor, stripping a delivery of roses, and the sky had gone the color of a bruise and then opened, the way summer skies do, all at once and without apology. She wouldn't wait for it to pass. She never waited for anything to pass. She took her bicycle, the buckets lashed to the basket, up the harbor road where it bent blind under the chestnuts in the loud silver rain. Elliot was at the cottage with the kettle on. He heard the storm and thought, "She'll be soaked. She'll come in laughing." And he got the towel down from the rail and set out the good coffee she'd written on a list, and he waited for the sound of her bicycle in the yard. What came instead was the phone, and a voice from the town saying, "Come now," and the road under his own running feet, and the blue light turning slow circles against the wet chestnut leaves at the bad bend where the delivery van had come down the hill too fast on a surface gone to glass. He remembered very little of it in order. He remembered a shoe in the road that was hers. He remembered someone saying her name to her over and over, and only slowly understanding the someone was him. He remembered that it was still raining, and that the rain seemed like an insult, and that he made bargains, in those minutes, with everything he had ever refused to believe in. She did not leave them. He held to that in the 11 days that followed, 11 days in a room that beeped, where she lay so still and so far away, where the doctors used careful words and would not promise him the one thing he asked. She was strong. She was, the surgeon said, remarkable. Her father sat on one side and Pip on the other, and Elliot slept in a plastic chair with her list still folded in his shirt pocket, "Buy the good coffee," and on the 12th morning, in the gray, before anyone was ready. Nora Bellamy opened her eyes. He was on his feet before he breathed. Nora, it's me. I'm here. You're all right. She looked at him. Her eyes moved over his face, the unshaved jaw, the wrecked eyes, the flower long gone from his buttonhole, with open, friendly, total blankness. And she smiled the polite, wary smile you give a kind stranger who has appeared, for reasons unclear, at your bedside. "Hello," Nora said. "I'm sorry. Have they sent you? Is it about the flowers?" "I've a delivery. I mustn't be late. Sunil leaves without you." She tried to sit. winced, looked around the strange bright room with dawning confusion, and then back at him, and the confusion cleared into nothing but courtesy. "I'm so sorry. I don't think I've had the pleasure. Have we met?" The floor of the world went out from under Elliot Shaw, silently, all at once, the way the harbor road had gone to glass. He would learn the name for it in the days that followed, from a soft-voiced doctor with a diagram, in a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and cut lilies from the shop downstairs. He would learn that the older memory had held her childhood, her father, the ferry, the shape of her own bright self, all safe, all there, right up to a shoreline about a year deep. And he would learn that past that shoreline, going forward, nothing new would stay. Each day she made would pour itself out in the night. Each morning the tide would come in clean. She would wake, for the rest of her life, on the far side of the summer she had met him. A Nora for whom Elliot Shaw had simply never happened. Will she? He couldn't finish it. He tried again. Is there a way back? The doctor was kind and honest, which are not always the same thing. The brain surprises us. I won't tell you never. But I won't tell you soon, and I won't tell you likely. She paused and looked at the ruin of him and said the thing she was perhaps not supposed to. "Mr. Shaw, she doesn't know what she's lost. That's a mercy of a sort. You know exactly what you've lost every day. There's no mercy in that at all. Some people in your position, most, if I'm truthful, find they cannot stay. No one would blame you. She won't even know you were the one who, no," Elliot said. It was not loud. It came up out of the same unbidden place the word Shaw had come from on the ferry, the place under all his careful silence where the truest things lived. He looked through the window in the door to where Nora sat propped in the white bed, already asking Pip something, already lighting up at whatever Pip answered. Already, unmistakably, herself, the bravest person he had ever met, entirely unaware she would have to be brave, threading a stray lily through the buttonhole of a hospital gown because a bare bit of blue had offended her sense of how a morning should look. She'd said it herself, on the ferry, the first thing she ever taught him. People who get used to beautiful things are the saddest people alive. He'd promised her he never would. She fell in love with me once, Elliot said, low, to no one, to himself, to the shut door. On a ferry. She didn't have to. She just decided I was worth the bother. His hand curled, the ghost of ink across the back of it, mine, underlined twice, long since washed away. If she did it once with no reason to, she can do it again. She can do it every day if she has to. He turned from the glass, and for the first time in 12 days, something in his face was not breaking, but setting, hard and clear. Like varnish going off, like a hull taking its final shape. Then I'll be there every morning, and every morning I'll make her fall in love with me again. Behind the door, unknowing, Nora laughed at something, that same laugh, surprised out of her, bright as struck water, and reached for the cold cup of tea by her bed as though it were the most ordinary morning in the world. It was, he understood then, the last time he would ever be a stranger to her by accident. From tomorrow, he would be a stranger to her on purpose, and he would spend himself against that tide with everything he had, and no one, least of all the woman he was doing it for, would ever remember to thank him. He did not yet know how heavy that would grow. He did not know about the mornings she would send him away, or the ones her father would beg him to give up and go build an easier life, or the single terrible morning, still a long way off, when she would ask him a question in that sunlit kitchen that he would have no honest answer for. He knew only the arithmetic he had chosen, and the vow he had made to a shut door. Tomorrow the tide would come in clean. And Elliot Shaw would be standing on the porch when it did, with a paper bag gone soft with butter and a single blue flower ready to begin again. That morning, the cornflower morning, the one with the bee he had named Gregory and appointed, over her cold tea, the official watchman of the honeysuckle, turned out to be one of the good ones. Elliot had learned to take the good ones the way the lake took light, without expecting them to last past noon. By 9, the heat had found the water, and Nora wanted to go down to the harbor. She always wanted to go down to the harbor. The market pole was older than he was, older than the thing that had happened to her, laid down in some deeper channel the tide couldn't reach. She loaded 3 zinc buckets into the back of his truck without asking whose truck it was, and told him where to put his hands under the heaviest one, and hummed something tuneless and pleased through her teeth, and he drove them down the hill with the windows open and the whole cab going thick with the wet green reek of stems and river. "You drive like a man who's frightened of the road," she said, one bare arm out the window, catching the wind in her cupped hand the way you'd cup a fall of rain. Slow, deliberate, like the road did something to you personally. "It did, once," he said, and kept his eyes ahead, and she didn't hear the floor drop out of the words, because to her they were only a boatman being dry. "Well, forgive it. Look at it. It's a beautiful road." She turned her whole face into the light coming off the harbor below, the white houses spilling down to the masts, the lake beyond hammered silver, and she sighed like a woman set down somewhere she'd chosen. "God, it robs me blind every single morning. Do you ever get used to it?" "No," Elliot said. His hands were steady on the wheel, and something behind his ribs was not. It was the exact question, word for word. The very first thing she had ever asked him, on a deck, with a cornflower dripping in her fist. And she had no idea she'd asked it before. Had asked it of him 100 mornings since, would ask it, please God, 100 more. She did not know she was quoting herself. He was the only one who kept the receipt. "Good," she said, satisfied. "Don't." People who get used to beautiful things are the saddest people alive, he said, before he could stop it. She swung round to look at him, delighted and suspicious at once, freckles bunching. "How did you know I was going to say that?" "Lucky guess. Nobody's that lucky." She studied his profile a moment longer, and he felt her doing it, the small pressure of being read. And then she let it go the way she let most things go now, lightly, without alarm, a stone dropped in deep water. "You're a strange one, boatman. I've decided I like it. Park by the ice house, the shade's better, and Sunil can't see us to shout." The harbor on a market morning was all noise and salt. Gulls worked the gutting tables down by the slipway, screaming their small greeds. The tide slapped the harbor wall in slow applause. Someone's radio played low from an open wheelhouse. The air was tar and diesel and fish, and over all of it, as they carried the buckets to her trestle, the sudden sugared wall of the flowers themselves. Stock and sweet pea and the first hot dahlias, so thick and so sweet it was almost a color. Nora set up her stall from muscle memory, snapping the legs of the table, tipping the buckets into their ranks, her hands doing the work while her mind wandered somewhere brighter, and Elliot stood back and let her, because this too he had learned, she needed to be a woman with a trade before she could be anything else. Nora. Love. A broad woman in an apron rolled over from the fish stall, sleeves shoved to the elbow, arms pink from the ice. There she is. "Give us a bunch of the pinks for Sunday. My mother's 90, and she's decided she's owed flowers weekly now. The tyrant." She was already reaching for her purse. Then her eye caught Elliot, and her face did a small, complicated thing, a softening and a wincing both. "Morning, Elliot," she said gentler, the way the whole harbor had learned to say his name. "You're a good pinks," Elliot said, easy, cutting across it before it could land where Nora would hear. "She's got a beauty of a bunch right here." Nora, oblivious, was already wrapping them. But her hands had slowed a half beat, and Elliot saw it, the flicker, the fine crease between her brows, because a mind as quick as hers could feel a drought even when it couldn't name the window. "Bridie," Nora said to the fishwoman, warm and certain, the name coming up from the old deep water where the years still held. Bridie, with the 90-year-old tyrant for a mother. "Of course I know you." She rapped and handed over the pinks and took the coins, and it was fine. It was going to be fine. And then Bridie, who meant nothing but love, patted Nora's wrist and said, "You look well. You look so well, considering," and the word considering fell into the morning like a dropped glass. Nora went still. Considering what? Nobody answered for a heartbeat too long. A gull screamed. The tide clapped the wall. "Considering the heat," Elliot said. "It's brutal by 10. Bridie, your mother'll want those in water sharp." And he put his hand, light, only for a second, the back of 2 fingers against Nora's shoulder blade, a boatwright's touch, the one you use to feel whether a seam will hold, and steered the whole moment 3 inches to the left of the cliff. Bridie fled, blessing them both. Nora watched her go, and the crease stayed. "Considering what?" she said again, quieter, not really to him. "People fuss," Elliot said. "You had a knock a while back, a fall. You're mending. It makes them tender and stupid. Ignore it." "True, all of it. Arrange the way you arrange a wound so the patient can bear to look." She turned the crease on him, weighing, and he held her eyes and let her find nothing in his but the flat, honest surface he'd spent 2 years learning to keep. And after a moment she exhaled, and the harbor flooded back in, gulls and salt, and the pull of the next customer. "A fall," she said, dry, filing that too. "That explains why everyone speaks to me like I'm made of eggs." She bumped his arm with her shoulder, restored. "Not you, though. You speak to me like I'm made of rope. I prefer it." "Now make yourself useful, rope man, and go and buy me a coffee off Merrick's van before I sell all these and have nothing left to do but think." He went. He was halfway to the coffee van, the coins warm in his fist, when he saw the man standing at the top of the slipway, watching Nora's stall, and his stomach dropped through the cobbles. Because he knew the set of those shoulders the way you know weather coming. Gil Bellamy had been a ferryman for 30 years before Sunil, and he still stood like a man braced against a moving deck, feet apart, weight low, ready for the world to pitch. He was 70 now, white-haired, brown as a nut, and he was looking at his daughter selling sweet peas in the sun with a grief on his face so total and so private that Elliot, who was drowning in the same water, felt like a thief for seeing it. Then Gil turned his head and found Elliot, and the grief shut like a door. "Shaw, he said it the way you'd name a debt." "Gil, walk with me." Not a request. The old man was already moving, away from the stall, along the harbor wall where the noise would cover them, and Elliot followed with the 2 coffees going cold in his hands because there was nothing else to do. They stopped at the far bollards, where the water was deep and green, and the moored hulls knocked and complained against their fenders. Gil looked out at it a while. A halyard pinged its mast, over and over, small and maddening. "She asked you about the flowers this morning?" Gil said. "Who leaves them in the blue jug?" "The milkman," Elliot said. "We don't have a milkman. Times are hard." Something almost cracked the old man's face, and didn't. "Aye, she's used that one on me 40 years. He set his brown hands on the rail. "I've been to the city, Shaw, Tuesday, saw a man at the Memorial Hospital, Ansel. A specialist, the good kind, the kind you wait 8 months for. He's got a unit. Purpose built. People like her, they've routines, they've staff who know the tricks, They've a garden she could grow things in, and they've studies running that might, he says. No promises. I made him say it twice. Might slow the slippage. Might catch a little more before it goes out with the rest. The water knocked. Elliot said nothing because he could feel the shape of it coming, and he wanted the old man to have to say every word himself. There's a place come free, Gil said. September, they don't come free often. He turned, and his eyes were wet and hard. The terrible combination of a man who has cried all he intends to. I'm taking it, Elliot. I'm taking her. To the city. To the city. Where there's people trained for it, instead of... He stopped. His jaw worked. Instead of a boat mender who turns up on my daughter's porch at dawn every day of God's year to court a girl who forgets him by supper. You think I don't watch you? You think the whole harbor doesn't watch you? They think you're a saint. I think you're a man, drowning, who's decided to take her down with him. It landed square. Elliot felt it go in, and he kept his feet. She's happy in the mornings, he said, low. You've seen her. She's not made of eggs, Gil. She's made of exactly what she always was. Right up until the light goes. I don't take anything from her she remembers giving. I don't ask her for one thing. Every morning she decides for herself whether I'm worth the bother. And every morning, so far, she has decided I am. You want to put her in a garden with strangers who'll be kind and correct and won't know that she thinks cornflowers are the only blue that doesn't try too hard, and you'll call that saving her. I'll call it letting her rest. It came up out of the old man like something torn. A gull lifted, screaming. Gil pressed the back of his wrist to his mouth, mastered it, went quiet and deadly. She was going to marry you. I know that. I let it happen. I liked you. God help me, I gave you the ferryman's blessing on my own front step. And then the road took that whole year off her like a plane taking a shaving, and now she doesn't even know she lost it, and every morning you go back and make her feel the beginning of a thing she'll never get to keep. That's not love, son. That's you, unable to bury it. You're not doing it for her. You're doing it so you don't have to be the one who forgets. Elliot's hands had gone white around the paper cups. Coffee welled up over his knuckles, lukewarm, and he didn't feel it. That's not true, he said. But his voice had a hairline in it, because the worst thing the old man had said was the thing he asked himself every night in the ticking cottage, alone, with a tin of her lists he still could not throw away. Isn't it? Gil straightened, the deck under him steadying. September, Shaw. I've signed nothing yet, because I'm an old fool who wanted to look you in the eye first. But I'll sign it. And between now and then, you'd be a mercy to us both if you started coming less. Let her get used to mornings without a boatman in them. So the leaving, when it comes, is one loss instead of 100. He looked past Elliot, down the wall, to where Nora was laughing at something with her hands full of stems, bright as struck water, unknowing she never has to grieve you, he said, softer. And it was almost unbearable, the tenderness under the iron. Don't make me the one who does it for her. He walked away up the slipway, braced against a deck that wasn't moving, and left Elliot standing at the deep green water with 2 ruined coffees and the whole morning gone to glass. He carried them back anyway. He'd promised her one, and he did not break the small promises. The small promises were the only currency he had that didn't expire at nightfall. You took an age, Nora said, not looking up, snipping, and you've spilled half of it, and it's cold, which, hold on. She did look up then, and her quick eye went over him the way it went over everything, ready for it to be interesting, and found instead something she had no history to explain. Her snipping stopped. You've gone into your workshop, she said slowly. Haven't you? The one in your head. You've pulled the door to." Elliot stared at her. She had said it, the exact words, "I always want to knock. Knock, knock, Elliot Shaw. What's in there?" Said on a green evening, a year and a summer gone, in a flower room, right before he'd turned her by the shoulders and told her it was her. It had always been her. She did not know she was quoting the best night of both their lives. It rose in her from wherever the deep things were kept, unlabeled, a bucket brought up from a well she didn't know she had. "I've upset you," she said, and set the scissors down, and her whole clever face was nothing but concern for a stranger. "I don't know how, since we met an hour ago and you've mostly carried buckets, but I have, and I'm sorry for it. I do that. I say the true thing before I've checked whether it's a kind thing." She reached out and, without asking, without ceremony, tucked a single dripping cornflower into the buttonhole of his work shirt, her cold knuckles grazing his collarbone, matter-of-fact as a florist and devastating as a verdict. "There, now you match the water. And whatever's in the workshop, boatman, you don't have to open the door for me. But you looked, just now, like a person who'd been told to give something up." Her head tilted. "Don't, whatever it is. My grandmother had a rule about that too. His throat had closed. Did she? She said the getting used to is the only thing that'll break your heart, so never do it." Nora frowned, faintly, at her own mouth, as though the sentence had surprised her by arriving whole. "Where do I get these from?" she murmured, half to herself, and shook it off and picked her scissors back up. "Anyway, drink your terrible coffee. You've earned it," considering the word again. Considering, she said it lightly, teasing, giving it back to him harmless. But Elliot heard the fishwoman's version underneath it, and Gil's September, and the 8 months you wait for a room in a city where no one would know about the milkman. And he understood. Standing in the sugared wall of her flowers, with her cornflower over his heart, that the tide he'd chosen to spend himself against had just grown a second current, and this one had his own doubts for an undertow. He drank the coffee. It was cold and gritty, and it was the best he could do. That night, when the harbor had emptied, and the buckets were rinsed, and Nora had gone up to write the letter she wrote every night to a self who would wake a stranger, a letter she did not know he had never once read, because that, too, was a line he would not cross, Elliot sat in Pip's kitchen, with the lamp low, and told her. Pip listened all the way through without moving, her chin on her fist, 24 years old and older than both of them. When he finished, she was quiet a moment, turning her mug. "Right," she said at last. "So, my father, who has not willingly boarded a boat since he handed Sunil the ropes, took himself all the way to the city on a Tuesday, alone, to sit in a hospital and be told there's a garden. And didn't tell me." She smiled, and it had no happiness in it at all. "That's not a man making a plan, Elliot. That's a man who's found somewhere to put the size of it down." She pushed her hair back. "He's not wrong that you're drowning, by the way. You're absolutely drowning. You look like something the lake spat out. Thanks, but he's wrong that she's not choosing." Pip looked at him steadily. "I watch her come down those stairs every morning, before you knock. She's read the letter. She doesn't have to come to the kitchen. She could stay up there and hide from the strange man on the porch. She comes down, Elliot. Every day she comes down." She turned the mug again. "Here's what frightens me, though, and I'll only say it once, so mind it." She started asking. "Little things. Why does August feel wrong? Why does everyone say considering? Last week she wrote something on the back of her wrist and showed it me in the morning like she'd found a message in a bottle." Pip pulled a folded receipt from her apron pocket and slid it across the scrub table into the lamplight. This was tucked in the flour tin. Her hand. She doesn't remember writing it. I don't know when she did. Elliot turned it over. In Nora's slanting, three-colored, list-making hand, in blue ink pressed hard, it said, "Who is the man that already knows my grandmother's rules?" And under it, underlined twice, the way she underlined only the things she meant, "Find out before he tells you a lie you want to believe." The lamp hissed. Outside, the honeysuckle stirred, and somewhere down the black water a halyard knocked its mast, patient and small, over and over, keeping a time that no one in the warm kitchen wanted to count. "She's reaching back through the current," Pip said, very low. "Some part of her knows there's a whole year sitting on the far bank, and it started throwing things across to see what sticks." She met his eyes. "One of these mornings, Elliot, she's going to ask you straight out. Not the milkman, the real thing. And Dad wants her gone to a garden in the city before she does, and you have to decide. Before he signs that paper, which is the crueler thing, letting her forget you clean, or letting her find out, one ordinary morning at that table, exactly how much she's already lost." Elliot looked at the receipt, at his name that wasn't on it and was underneath every word of it, and he did not have an answer. For the first time since the shut hospital door, the vow he had made against the tide had met a question the tide could not wash away by morning. And it was written, now, in the only ink she had ever fully trusted, tucked in a tin where anyone might find it, waiting for a day he could feel coming up the calendar like weather off the lake. The cottage kept the day's heat the way an old kettle holds warmth long after the flame is out. Elliot sat at the table he never ate at, in the dark, with the window thrown open to the lake, and did not sleep. The clock he had never bothered to fix ticked its wrong time at him. Moths came to the lamp and stayed, batting soft against the glass. And on the boards in front of him, dead center in the pool of light, sat the tin. It was a biscuit tin, dented, the painted lid worn back to bare metal at the two corners where his thumb had prized it open 1,000 times. Inside, her hand. "Buy the good coffee. Kiss me before you say anything about my hair. Remember you promised to teach me to splice a rope, and you have not, liar, 2 summers of a woman's quick blue script. Kept because he was a man who threw nothing away and had finally, once, found something worth the habit. He had carried the tin out to the truck at 3 in the morning and carried it back in at 4. He did this the way other men pace a floor. Pip's folded receipt sat in his shirt pocket now, pressed against the old soft creases of the lists, and the two of them together weighed more than any load he had ever put on a deck. Who is the man that already knows my grandmother's rules? And under it, in the ink she trusted over everything, find out before he tells you a lie you want to believe. The lake breathed at the window, cool and green. The smell of it laid over the linseed and the sawdust of the room. Somewhere out on the black water, a fish rose and fell, one soft note. He turned the tin a half-inch on the table, the grit under it whispering, and made no decision, because there was no honest decision to make. Tell her, and he handed a woman with no defenses the whole size of what she had lost. Every ordinary morning, forever, say nothing, and Gil signed a paper, and September came. And one day soon, a man in a clean corridor 100 miles off would leave a cornflower in a jug, and it would mean nothing to anyone. He was still sitting there when the window went from black to gray to the first thin gold, and the honeysuckle at his own fence woke up and began to smell of the day. He put the tin in the truck one last time, and this time he did not carry it back in. Pip met him at the door before he could knock, which she had never done. She had a mug in each hand and shadows under her eyes to match his, and she stepped out onto the warm boards and pulled the door to behind her. "Don't knock yet," she said, low. "Give it a second. Elliot, she's had a morning. She was up before me." She's got the wrist thing again, and the flower tins out on the table, and she's read the letter twice, which she never does, and she keeps looking at the door like she's expecting a bailiff. Pip pushed a mug at him. He didn't take it. She asked me, cold as anything, over the tea, whether I'd ever lie to her to be kind. And I said no. And she looked at me, Elliot, and she said, "That's exactly what a kind liar would say," and then she smiled to take the sting off. And I have never in my life been more frightened of my own sister. She's sharp this morning. She's sharp as the day she went under. Pip's voice caught and steadied. It's the good ones that frighten me now. The blank mornings I can steer, but the sharp ones, she was always sharpest right before she saw straight through a thing. She looked down at the tin under his arm, and her face changed, going still. What's that? Her lists. He said it plainly. The ones she wrote me. All of them. Pip went the color of the milk in the mugs. You can't. Your father comes back with a pen and a date, Elliot said, and she goes to a garden not knowing she ever had a summer. Or she finds it out here, at her own table, from the one person who'll stay in the room while she does. His jaw worked. You said it yourself. One of these mornings she asks me straight out. I'd rather it be a morning I chose than one she ambushes me on. And I think, his voice thinned, I think she's already chosen it for both of us, Pip. She's got the flower tin out. Behind the door, a chair scraped. Then Nora's voice, bright and edged and entirely awake. I can hear the two of you conspiring on my own porch, you know. It's very rude. Come in or go home, but stop leaving flowers in jugs and whispering about me like I'm a will being read. Pip shut her eyes. God help us, she breathed, and opened the door. The kitchen was full of the early light and the whole green weight of the flowers, buckets of them on the flags, the sugared water smell thick enough to lean on, dahlias going soft, sweet peas climbing their strings up the window. And at the scrub table, in the man's shirt with the sleeves shoved up, one bare foot tucked under her, sat Nora, with the flower tin open in front of her and the letter unfolded beside it, and a receipt held flat under her thumb. She looked up, and her eyes went over him the way they always did, ready for it to be interesting, but there was no blankness in them this morning. There was something worse. There was a woman doing sums. "Boatman," she said. "Sit down. I've been reading about you." He sat. He set the tin on the floor by his chair, out of the light, and she watched him do it and filed it. "This letter," she said, and turned it a quarter so the morning fell across it, "is in my own hand, which I've established, because I write in 3 colors like a lunatic, and no one else does. And it tells me a man named Elliot comes in the mornings, and that I don't owe him a thing, and that I may send him off whenever I like." She lifted her eyes. "You wrote that on your own porch this morning, so I take it you're Elliot. I am." "Good. That much holds." She tapped the receipt under her thumb. "This, though, this I found in the flower, and it's also my hand, older, harder pressed. I press hard when I mean it, and it doesn't tell me anything at all. It asks. It asks how a stranger knows my grandmother's rules." Her thumb pressed slowly white against the paper. "You knew about the cornflowers yesterday. Pip told me you always do. You knew about the workshop in your head before I'd said it. You said considering, the same as Bridie, the same as everyone. Like it's a stone in the middle of a road we all walk round and only I can't see." She leaned back. Outside, a bee found the honeysuckle and set up its low-fat drone at the sill, and neither of them looked at it. So, kind liar. "Here is my grandmother's oldest rule, the one under all the others. Never trust a comfort you didn't ask for. And every soul in this town, including my own sister, has been comforting me for weeks over a thing no one will name. What is the thing, Elliot? The kitchen held very still. A dahlia let a petal go. It fell without a sound. Pip stood at the counter, with her back to them both, hands flat on the wood, not breathing. Elliot had made a rule, on a shut hospital door, that he would never lie to her in this hour. It was the one thing that kept the whole impossible thing decent. He had kept it for 2 years by telling her only the small truths: pastries, sugar, a fall, mend slowly, and steering the great 1 3 inches to the left of the cliff every single morning. He looked at her now, at the freckles and the doing-some's eyes, and the thumb gone white, and he understood that the steering was over, that she had walked herself to the edge on her own 2 feet in the night, and that the only decency left was to stand there with her while she looked down. "You had a fall," he said. "That's true, and you know it. On the harbor road, in a storm, last summer." He kept his voice flat and level, the surface he had spent 2 years learning to keep. "When you woke up, the newest part was gone. Everything old is safe: your father, the ferry, Pip, the shape of you. But past a shoreline about a year back, nothing new stays. You make a day, and it's a full day, a real one, and then the night takes it out clean, and you wake on the far side of last summer with the table swept bare." His hands were open on his knees. "That's why the letters. That's why Brady says considering. That's why your father has been to the city on a Tuesday. That's the thing, Nora. That's the whole of it." She did not flinch. She had asked for it plainly, and she took it plainly, and only her thumb betrayed her, pressing and pressing the receipt, as though she could push herself through it to the other side. "How long?" she said. "A year. This coming week." "And how many times?" she said, and her voice was very steady, which was how he knew it was costing her everything. "Have I sat at this table and been told all this for the first time?" He did not answer. That was the answer. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the tin by his chair, the dented lid, the corners worn to bare metal, and something moved behind her face that he had no name for. An old current turning under new water. "What's in the tin?" she said. "You put it on the floor when you came in. You put it where I wouldn't reach. You've done that with the truth all morning, boatman. Set it down just out of my hands. I'm done with it. What's in the tin?" Elliot picked it up. His fingers would not quite work the lid. When it came all at once, and the smell rose out of it. Old paper, pencil, the faint ghost of her flower room, stalk and stems and dust, and he set it on the table between them, in the full light, and did not say a word, because there were no words left that were his to say. The words in the tin were hers. She reached in. She lifted out a receipt gone soft as cloth. She read her own blue hand, and her lips moved, and no sound came. "Kiss me before you say anything about my hair." She set it down. She lifted another. "Buy the good coffee." Another. "You went into your workshop again at supper, and I let you, but I want it noted I knew." Another. And this one, her hand had pressed so hard the pen had torn the paper. "Teach me to splice a rope. Liar, you promised, and I am keeping every promise you make me, whether you like it or not." "These are mine," she said. Her voice had gone somewhere small. "This is my hand. I wrote these. You did. To you. To me." She went very still over the open tin, the light lying across her hands, the bee droning on and on at the sill, and Elliot watched her walk backward through the current toward a bank she could not see. feeling for it in the dark with a woman's own words for a rope. And then, from the very bottom of the tin, from under 2 years of lists, she drew out the last thing. And it was not a list. It was a photograph, a small square one, curled at the edges, and in it a man in an oil dark work shirt stood in the doorway of a flower room with the whole lake going pink behind him, and there was a cornflower in his buttonhole, and a woman had her inked hand pressed flat to his chest and her face turned up to his, laughing, wet-eyed, caught in the middle of the best word she ever said. Nora looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she turned her own hand over, palm down, and looked at the back of it, at the bare, unmarked skin, as though she expected to find something written there, and was undone, quietly, terribly, to find it clean. "I don't remember," she whispered. "I don't remember one single second of it." She lifted her eyes to him, and they were not doing sums any more. They were drowning. "I loved you, didn't I? It's all over my own hand. I loved you, and I was going to. The rope, the coffee, the good morning list. This isn't a stranger who carries buckets. This is a whole life. This is a whole life I lost, and no one told me I was even missing it. Nora, don't." She stood so fast the chair went over behind her and cracked against the flags. Pip turned from the counter, one hand out. Nora did not see it. She had the photograph in one fist and the torn paper list in the other, and she stood in the middle of her own bright kitchen, looking at them as if the floor had gone to glass. "You knew," she said, and her voice broke open at last, low and shaking. "Every morning. You've known every morning that I was standing here having a nice cup of tea with a nice strange man while a whole year of my own life sat rotting on the other side of a river I can't cross. You let me flirt with you. You let me tuck flowers in your shirt and think it was my own clever idea. And it was never new, was it? It was never once new. It was you standing in front of a woman who'd already given you everything, watching her hand it over again like a fool because she didn't know she'd already paid." Every word landed square. Elliot took each one standing, the way he had taken Gil's at the deep green water, and said nothing to soften it, because every word was true. "That's not why," he said at last, very low. "Then why?" She was crying now, the tears coming without her permission, and she swiped at them, furious, as though they belonged to some other, weaker woman. "Tell me why a man does that. Tell me why you come to a porch every single day of your life to court a woman who empties you out every night like a rinsed bucket. Because Bridie thinks you're a saint, and my father thinks you can't bury it. And I stand here looking at my own handwriting, and I can't tell which of them is right. And I need one true thing, Elliot. I have had a life full of kind lies, and I need one true thing before I lose this morning, too." The kitchen rang with it. A boat's halyard knocked its mast, far off, patient and small. Elliot stood, and he did not reach for her, though every part of him strained to, because he had learned that reaching for her when she did not know him was a theft, and he would not steal from her, not even now, not even to stop her crying. "You told me one thing on the ferry," he said, "the first thing you ever taught me. That people who get used to beautiful things are the saddest people alive. And you made me promise I'd never get used to you." His own voice was going now, the hairline widening. "I'm keeping the promise, Nora. That's the whole of it. That's the only true thing I've got. Every morning I don't get used to you. Every morning is the first time, because for me it very nearly is, and I would rather stand at your door and be a stranger you choose than sit in a fixed-up cottage 100 miles off being a man you were spared." She stared at him, wrecked, the photograph shaking in her fist. And for one moment, something crossed her face that was not grief and not fury, that was almost the old delighted suspicion, almost the woman on the deck saying, "Nobody's that lucky." Then the front door opened without a knock, and Gil Bellamy stood in it with the harbor light behind him, and a long white envelope in his brown hand, and he took in the overturned chair, the open tin, the photograph, his daughter's ruined face, and Elliot standing in the wreck of the morning he had promised never to make. And the old ferryman's grief shut like a door and came up as iron. "What have you done?" Gil said. "Dad." Pip crossed the kitchen fast. "Dad, don't. What have you done, Shaw?" He came in slow, braced against a deck that wasn't moving, and set the white envelope on the table beside the tin, deliberate, so that the two things sat side by side in the light, a lifetime of her lists, and a place in a garden come September. "I asked you," he said not loud, which was worse than loud, for one mercy. One, to come less, so the leaving was one loss instead of 100. And I come back to find you've handed her the lot in a biscuit tin, so she can lose it all at once, on a Tuesday, in her own kitchen. He turned to Nora, and everything in him gentled and cracked. "Nora, love, look at me. Not at the tin, at your father." She looked at him. "You went to the city," she said, hollow. "You went to a hospital, and you didn't tell me. I went to find you somewhere to rest, my darling." "Rest," she laughed, and it was the worst sound Elliot had ever heard her make, wet and broken, and nothing like struck water. "Everyone wants me to rest. Bridie's mother gets flowers weekly, and I get rest. A garden. Strangers who'll be kind and correct and won't know one blessed thing about me, because there'll be nothing left to know by tea time." She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead, hard, as if she could hold the morning in by main force. "How am I meant to decide anything? How is a woman meant to choose a whole life when she can't keep hold of a single afternoon of it? You're all standing round me with your envelopes and your tins, deciding my life over my head, because you think I can't. Because I can't." She stopped. She looked down at her own two hands, one full of a stranger she had loved, one full of a torn promise in her own blue ink, and the fight went out of her all at once. The way it goes out of a sail when the wind drops, and what was left was worse than the fight. "I'm so tired," Nora said to no one, in a small, clear voice. "I'm so tired, and I don't even know how long I've been tired, because I don't get to keep the tiredness either." She set the photograph down on the table, gently, face up, the laughing woman and the cornflower man. "I think I'd like everyone to leave now, even you." She did not look at Elliot when she said it. She could not. "Especially you, boatman. Because you're the one I could love again. I can feel it. It's the most frightening thing in this room. I could stand here and fall for you all over like it was new. And I'm so afraid of how easy it would be, when I know now it isn't new. It's just me, paying twice for something I'll never get to keep." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Go home, please, before I forget why I asked you to." The bee lifted off the honeysuckle and blundered out through the open window into the heat. Nobody moved. And Elliot Shaw, who had faced down a doctor and an old ferryman and 2 years of clean tides and never once stepped back from her door, bent and picked his empty hands up off his knees and stood, and did the one thing he had sworn on a shut door he would never do. He left while she still knew his name. He got as far as the porch. The boards were hot through his boots already, the whole hillside loud with summer, cut grass, warm cedar, the honeysuckle he'd let grow wild, the drone of insects in the long light. Behind him, through the open door, he heard Gil's low voice and Pip's sharp one going at each other over the wreck of the table, and under them, terribly, the sound of Nora not crying, which was worse, the flat, exhausted quiet of a woman who has run out of a thing there was never enough of to begin with. Pip came out after him. She had the white envelope in her hand. She stood on the top step with the harbor spread out below, the masts bright, the lake hammered silver, all of it robbing them blind exactly as it did every morning, and she looked at it instead of at him, because some things can only be said to a view. "He's going to sign it," she said. "Tonight, I think. He's got the date and the pen and the size of it finally somewhere to go, and she, Elliot. You heard her. She asked to go. Not in those words. But she stood there and said she couldn't choose her own life, and she's tired of paying twice. And my father will take that to the city and call it consent." She turned the envelope over. "And the terrible thing, the thing I can't say to him, is I don't know that he's wrong." Elliot said nothing. Down at the harbor, a horn answered a horn across the water, the way they had that first morning, and he heard it, and it took the legs out from under him worse than any word. "She's right about one thing, though," Pip said, quieter. "You're the one she could love again. I've watched it happen 100 mornings. It never once got harder for her. That's the cruelty of it, isn't it? For her, it's always the easy part, the falling. It's you that carries the rest." She finally looked at him, 24 and older than the lake. "So here's the question, and I'm only asking it once, because after tonight there won't be a question left to ask. If you love her, and God knows you do, I've never seen anything like it, and I hope I never do again. It's flayed you to the bone, then you have to decide what loving her actually means now. Standing on this porch every morning making her fall so you don't have to be the one who forgets. Or letting her go somewhere she can be steady, even if steady means she never knows your name again." She pressed the white envelope flat against his chest, the way her sister had once pressed an inked hand there, and held it a moment. "One of those is love, Elliot, and one of them is you not able to bury it. And I swear to you, standing here, I cannot tell which is which any more. Neither can Dad. And she's the only one who could, and she won't keep the answer past midnight." She took her hand away. The envelope stayed pressed a second against his shirt, and then slid, and he caught it, and looked down at it. Nora's name on the front, in Gill's careful ferryman's print, and a city address, and a date in September that was suddenly no distance at all. "Come tomorrow, or don't," Pip said, from the doorway, her hand already on the latch. "But if you come knowing what you're coming for." Because she started asking the real questions now, and the current pulled the whole year up into the light this morning, and it won't sink back down clean. She'll wake tomorrow with the table swept bare of you, the way she always does. Her voice went thin. But it's the first morning she'll wake, knowing there's a whole year missing, and a man in it, and a tin. She wrote it all down before we could stop her. It's in the flower again. In her own hand. The latch clicked. You can't outrun her own ink, Elliot. Nobody ever could. Not even her. The door closed, and Elliot Shaw stood alone on the warm porch in the full gold morning with an envelope in his hand that would carry her 100 miles off by September, and a promise in his chest he had made to a shut door and broken, for the first time, an hour ago. And down the black-green water the halyard knocked its mast, patient and small, over and over, counting out a time that had, at last, begun to run. He did not go home the way a man goes home. He drove the long way, up past the ice house and along the ridge, where the whole lake lay out flat and burning under the noon. And he did not once look at it, which was its own kind of grief, because getting used to not looking was the thing she had made him swear against. The envelope lay on the seat beside the tin. her name in Gill's careful print, a city 100 miles off, a date in September that had stopped being a word and become a countdown. He sat with both of them at the table he never ate at until the light went amber, and then blue, and then out. The moths came to the lamp and stayed. He turned the tin a half-inch, the grit whispering under it, and he made himself do the thing he had refused to do for 2 years. He asked Gill's question as if it were his own, and he answered it honestly. Was it love, standing on her porch every morning? Or was it a man who could not put a thing in the ground? He lifted out the softest receipt, the one worn to cloth. Never trust a comfort you didn't ask for. Her grandmother's rule, the one under all the others, the one she had thrown across the current that very morning like a woman hauling herself up a rope hand over hand. And there it was, the whole of his mistake, written in her own blue ink a summer before the road ever went to glass. He had been giving her comfort she never asked for. Every morning the bag gone soft with butter, the cornflower, the careful 3 inches of steering her clear of the cliff. He had decided, alone, what she could carry. He had loved her the way you love something breakable, by keeping the truth of it out of her reach. And a woman who trusted ink over memory, who wanted the true thing before the kind thing, who had made him promise never to get used to her, that woman had never once in her whole bright life asked to be spared. You want the truth every morning, he said aloud, to the tin, to the moths, to the wrong-timed clock. His voice came out cracked from disuse. You always did. And I've been feeding you the milkman. He understood it then. The way a hull finally understands its shape under the plane. Loving her was not making her fall. Making her fall was easy. Pip had said so, and Pip was right. The falling was the only easy part, and he had let himself keep the easy part because it did not ask him to lose anything. Loving her was handing her the whole terrible weight of it every morning, and trusting her to choose with her eyes open, even if she chose the city, even if she chose to send him off for good. It was hers to choose. It had always been hers, and he had been quietly deciding it for her under cover of butter and blue flowers, and calling it devotion. He did not sleep. He watched the window go gray and then gold. And the honeysuckle at his own fence woke and began to smell of the day, and he stood, and he did not pick up the paper bag, and he did not cut a cornflower. He picked up the tin. And he picked up the envelope, which was not his to carry and which he would carry anyway, one last time, to lay open on the table where she could reach it. Then he drove down the hill to make her fall out of love with the lie he had been telling her, and see whether the truth could stand on its own 2 feet on her porch. Pip met him at the door again before he could knock, and this time she did not have coffee. She had the look of a woman who had been up all night steering. She knows, Pip said, low and fast. She woke at 5. The flour tin was out before I got down. She's written half a wall of it, Elliot, in 3 colors, a whole year missing, a man in it, a biscuit tin. Don't trust the kind ones. She read it back to herself like a stranger reading a map of her own house. She glanced behind her. And then she went quiet. Not the frightened quiet. The other one. The doing sums one. She's been sitting at that table since dawn with her own handwriting all round her, and she asked me one thing. Pip's voice thinned. She asked when the boatman usually comes. What did you tell her? Early, before the heat finds the lake. Pip looked at the tin under his arm, and then at the white envelope in his hand, and her face changed. You brought it back. It's hers to open, not your father's to spring on her. He held Pip's eyes. I'm not going to court her this morning, Pip. I'm done with the milkman. I'm going to tell her all of it, and I'm going to put the envelope in front of her. And I'm going to let her choose with everything on the table, the tin, the city, me, and if she sends me off, I'll go. And I won't come back, because that'll be her choice made whole, and I've no right to keep overturning it every dawn just because she can't. Pip stared at him a long moment. Something in her, some brace she'd been holding since the hospital, gave way, and her eyes filled. "That's the first thing you've said in a year," she whispered. "That sounds like love and not like drowning." She stepped back and opened the door. "Go slow. She's not made of eggs, but she's carrying the whole ocean this morning, and she knows it now." The kitchen was full of the early light and the green weight of the flowers, buckets on the flags, the sugared water smell thick enough to lean on, sweet peas climbing their strings up the glass. And the walls were papered in her hand. Receipts and torn envelopes and the backs of ferry timetables, pinned and propped and laid in rows, blue and red and green ink, a woman's whole quick mind thrown up around her like a net cast to catch what the current kept stealing. At the center of it sat Nora, in the man's shirt with the sleeves shoved up, one bare foot tucked under her, the open tin before her, and the photograph propped against the blue jug where the cornflowers stood. She looked up, and her eyes went over him the way they always did, ready for it to be interesting, but there was no blankness this morning, and there was no fury either. There was a woman who had been reading about her own life all night, and had a great many questions, and had decided, characteristically, to ask them in order. "Boatman," she said, "sit down. I've been up since 5 making a fool of myself with a pen." She gestured at the walls without looking at them. "You'll forgive the doctor. I woke up knowing I'd lost a year and a person, and I couldn't find either, so I wrote down everything I could feel the shape of, the way you sketch a boat you can't see the far side of." Her thumb pressed slow and white against the tin's dented rim. "You're the person. I worked that out around 6. There's a photograph of you in my chest of drawers with my own hand flat on your heart, and a tin of lists in your keeping that are addressed to a man I don't remember loving, and every soul in this town goes soft in the face when they say your name. So, Elliot Shaw." She lifted her eyes, and they were steady and terrified both. "I'm going to ask you things, and I want the true answer, not the kind one. Can you do that? Because I don't think you have been." "No," he said. "I haven't. I've been telling you the milkman." He pulled out the chair across from her and set the tin on the table between them, in the full light, and beside it he laid the long white envelope, her name in Gill's print facing up. "I'm done with that. Ask me anything. I'll tell you the whole of it, even the parts that'll hurt you, even the parts that hurt me. And when you've got it all, there's a choice on this table that's yours, and only yours, and I'll hold to whatever you decide." He put his open hands flat on the wood. "That's the true thing I should have given you a year ago. Ask." She looked at his hands a moment. The oil worked permanent into the knuckles, and something crossed her face. Recognition. Not of a fact, but of a texture. "I trust hands more than faces," she murmured, half to herself. "Faces lie constantly. Hands can't be bothered," he said, before he could stop it. Her head came up sharp. "I was going to say that. I know." The crease came between her brows, and for one held second the whole morning balanced on it. Then she pulled a green-inked receipt off the table, the hard-pressed one, and turned it to face him. "Then start here," she said. "This one I wrote before whatever happened to me. It says, 'Teach me to splice a rope, liar, you promised.' I've read it 40 times this morning. Did you ever teach me?" "No," Elliot said, and his voice went. I never did. We ran out of the summer we meant to do it in. You were going to hold me to it. You held me to everything. He turned his hand over on the table, palm up, empty. You wrote mine on the back of this hand once, in ink that didn't wash off for days, and underlined it twice, because you trusted ink over everything. It's gone now. It's been gone a long time. That's the part I couldn't say. Nora looked at his empty palm for a long time. Outside, a bee found the honeysuckle and set up its low-fat drone at the sill, and neither of them looked at it, and she did not cry, though her jaw worked once. Hard, all right, she said, very quiet. That's true. I can feel that it's true, which is the worst way to know a thing. She set the receipt down with great care, as if it might tear again along its old wound. Now the hard one. The one I've been circling since dawn. She turned her whole clever face on him, and her thumb went white again. Do you do this because you love me? Or do you do it because you can't stand to be the one who lets me go? Because my father thinks it's the second. And I read my own walls this morning, boatman, and I couldn't tell either. And I need to know which man is standing in my kitchen before I decide anything, because I could love the first one. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. And I'd have to send the second one home. The kitchen rang with it. A dahlia let a petal go. It fell without a sound. Pip stood at the counter with her back to them, hands flat on the wood, not breathing. Elliot did not reach for the kind answer. He sat with the question the way he'd sat with a tin all night, and he gave her the thing he'd found at the bottom of it. It was the second one, he said, for a long while. Your father saw it clear, and he was right, and it took me till this morning to stop pretending he wasn't. He kept his eyes level on hers. I loved the falling, Nora. It's the easy part. You do it clean and brave every single day, and it costs you nothing you remember, and I let myself keep it because it never asked me to lose you. Every morning I got you new, and I never once had to put you in the ground. That's not the whole of love. That's a man hiding from the end of a thing by starting it over. Her breath caught. Then let me finish, because you asked for the true one. His hands closed and opened, but somewhere in there it turned, and I know when. It was the mornings you sent me off. You did, some days, before you knew any of this, you'd take one look at a strange man on your porch and say, "Not today," and I'd go. And it near broke me every time, and every time I went, because the one thing I would not do was take a choice from you. That's the part that isn't drowning, Nora. A drowning man grabs. I let go of you 100 times on that porch and drove home empty, because your no meant more to me than my whole aching morning. That's the love, not the falling, the letting go every time you asked, and coming back only to ask again, never to make you. He nodded at the envelope. So here. Your father found you a place in a garden in the city, where there's people trained for this and studies that might slow how fast it goes. It's real, and it might help you. And I brought it back so it'd be in your hands and not sprung on you. If you choose it, I'll carry your buckets to the car myself, and I won't follow. That's me letting go. That's the truest thing I've got left to give you. His voice finally broke, clean through. I'd rather lose you to your own free choice than keep you with a lie you didn't ask for. Nora sat very still in the net of her own handwriting, the photograph propped against the blue jug, the tin open between them, the envelope beside it with her name facing the light. And she did not reach for the envelope. She reached instead across the table and turned his hand over, palm down, and looked at the bare knuckles where the word had been. Mine, she said softly, tracing where the ink had gone. That's what I wrote. You said twice underlined. She looked up, I don't remember doing it. But I know exactly why I did. I can feel the why sitting right there under the not remembering. Like a stone under water you can see, but can't reach. Her eyes filled at last, and she let them, and did not swipe the tears away furious this time. She let them fall on the back of his hand where the ink had been. That's the cruelty, isn't it? I get to keep the why. I just never get to keep the you. Nora, the front door opened without a knock. Gil Bellamy stood in it with the harbor light behind him, and he did not have a pen. He had come down the hill, braced against a deck that wasn't moving, and he took in the papered walls, the open tin, the photograph against the jug, his daughter's wet face and Elliot's turned-up empty hand, and the white envelope lying square in the light with her name toward the room, and the old ferryman stopped dead on his own threshold. "You brought it back," Gil said. His voice had gone strange. "It's hers, Gil, not ours." Elliot stood, slow, and did not step in front of Nora, because that was the old sin. The steering, and he was done with it. I told her everything, the road, the year, the tin, the city, all of it. No milkman. She's got the whole of it now, and the envelope's on the table, and it's her choice, and neither of us gets to make it over her head any more. Not you with a pen, not me with a paper bag. He met the old man's eyes. "You were right about me. For a long while you were dead right. I've stopped. But you were wrong about her, and you've been wrong about her since the hospital. She's not made of eggs. She never was. Ask her yourself, and then listen to what she says, the way you'd listen to any woman deciding her own life." Gil came in slow. He stopped at the table, and he looked down at the walls of blue and red and green ink, his daughter's quick mind thrown up all around her like a net, and something in the iron of him buckled. "You did all this," he said to Nora, hoarse, "since 5 o'clock. Since I woke up knowing I'd been robbed, and everyone in my life had agreed not to tell me," Nora said. "It was not cruel. It was level, and it was worse than cruel for being level. Sit down, Dad. You went to a city on a Tuesday and didn't tell me. You've earned a chair at your own reckoning." Gil sat. The great brown hands that had held ferry ropes for 30 years lay useless on the scrubbed wood. For a moment no one spoke, and the halyard knocked its mast far off down the green water, patient and small, and the bee droned at the sill. "I wanted you to rest," Gil said at last, and his voice cracked down the middle. "That's the God's truth, Nora. I couldn't watch it. Every morning that man on the porch, and you shining up at him like it was the first day of the world, and me the only one in the room who knew it was the 400th, and that by supper it'd be swept off you like it never was. I couldn't. I'm your father. I'm meant to be able to fix the deck when it pitches. And I can't fix this. So I found a garden 100 miles off where somebody trained could carry the size of it, because I couldn't carry it and stand up straight, and I told myself that was mercy." His mouth worked. It wasn't mercy, was it? It was me finding somewhere to set the weight down. Pip said the same. Nora murmured. "Pip's cleverer than the pair of us." Gil pressed the back of his wrist to his mouth, mastered it, and did the hardest thing Elliot had ever watched a man do. He reached out, and he took the white envelope with his own daughter's name on it, and he tore it clean across, and then across again, and laid the pieces down in a small torn drift beside the tin. "There," he said rough, "it's not on the table any more. If you want the city, Nora, you'll go, because you chose it in the light, and I'll drive you, and I'll never say the word rest to you again as long as I stand. But I'll not sign your life away over your head while you sleep. I'm sorry, my darling. I've been so frightened of losing you slow that I near sent you off fast to save myself the watching." He looked up at Elliot, and the grief in his face had nothing left of iron in it. And I'm sorry to you, son, I called you a drowning man, taking her down with him. You just laid her whole life on this table and told her to choose free of you. That's not drowning. My girl was right about your hands the first morning she ever saw them, and I was a fool not to trust them the same. He put out one great brown hand across the table, Ferryman's blessing. I gave it you once on my own front step. I'm giving it you again, and this time I know exactly what I'm giving. Elliot took the old man's hand. It gripped like he meant it, cold and calloused, the way his daughters had on a deck 2 summers gone. But it was Nora who broke the silence, and she was looking at neither of them. She was looking at the torn envelope, and then at the tin, and then at the photograph of the laughing woman with her inked hand flat on a boatmender's chest. And her whole clever face had gone somewhere very quiet and very certain. I'm not going to the city, she said. Nora, Gil began. Listen, you're going to let me finish, both of you, because I've had since 5 a.m. to think, and you've had a torn envelope and a handshake. She stood, and the chair did not go over this time. She pushed it in, deliberate. She crossed to the wall of her own writing and laid one hand flat against it, blue and red and green ink under her palm. Here's what I know that neither of you does, because you've been too busy carrying me to ask. I don't need to remember a thing to choose it. She turned. I chose him once on a ferry with no reason to, Pip told me. I chose him with soil on my face and 4 buckets I couldn't lift, a total stranger, because he had the right hands and I trusted them. I didn't need a history to do it. I did it on the strength of one morning. Her voice steadied into something Elliot had not heard from her since before the road. And I can do that. That's the one thing this whole rotten current can't take from me. Every morning I get is a whole morning. I met the love of my life in the length of a ferry crossing. I've timed it, Dad. It's 11 minutes to the far jetty. 11 minutes. I can fall in that. I've proved I can fall in that 400 times over. She looked at Elliot, and the terror was still there, but under it now was the old delighted daring. The woman on the deck saying, "Nobody's that lucky." The city can have my mornings if it'll slow the slippage. I'll go up for the studies. I'll let the clever man try. But I'm not going to live in a garden of strangers being kept safe from my own life. I'll live here, in the flowers, and every morning, boatman, you'll knock, and you'll tell me the true thing straight off. No milkman, no fall, no considering, and you'll show me the tin, and you'll let me read my own ink, and then I'll decide, free and clear, whether you're worth the bother. Her chin came up, and I already know what I'll decide. Because I'm looking at your hands right now with no history at all, and I want them for the rest of a life I won't get to keep. That's not the falling being easy. That's me, choosing, with the whole size of it on the table. Choosing anyway. The kitchen did not ring this time. It went soft, the way a room goes when something that was breaking finishes and settles into a new shape instead. Elliot crossed to her. He did not sweep her up. He had learned better than that, and this was a woman who had just walked her whole self up out of a river, hand over hand, and she would not be swept, she would be met. He stopped an arm's length off, close enough that the honeysuckle smell of her cut across the flowers, and he lifted one hand and, slow enough that she could stop him, tucked a single cornflower from the blue jug into the top buttonhole of his own work shirt, so she wouldn't have to reach, so the choosing stayed hers. There, he said, unsteady, now I match the water. And I owe you for the flowers. I've owed you for 2 years, and I'd like the rest of my life to settle up. His voice went, but only if you'll have me knock tomorrow, knowing I'll be a stranger on your porch and choosing to open the door anyway. Nora reached up. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, over the cornflower, over the heart, going like something trying to get free. Exactly as a laughing woman had once done in a photograph curled at the edges, and she did not know she was quoting it. And he would never tell her, because it was hers to do new every time, and that was the whole gift of her. "Don't you dare," she whispered, fierce and wet-eyed, "get used to me." "Never," Elliot said, into her hair, breaking clean open at last. "God help me." Never. Behind them, Gil Bellamy put his face in his great brown hands, and Pip crossed the kitchen and folded her arms around her father's shoulders. And the bee lifted off the honeysuckle and blundered out through the open window into the full gold morning, and down the black-green water a horn answered a horn across the harbor, the way they had the very first day. It was not a fairy tale, and Nora would have thrown a bucket at anyone who tried to make it one. Real healing is not a scene in a film. The morning after, the table swept bare of him again, and Elliot stood on the porch with his heart in his throat and no promises, and it took the truth and the tin and 11 long minutes at her own kitchen table before she looked at his hands and decided once more that he was worth the bother. It took that every morning. It never stopped taking it. Some mornings were long. 1 or 2 mornings, still, she read the whole tin and said not today, and he drove home empty and did not grab, because her no was hers, and he came back at dawn to ask again, the way he always had. That was the shape of the life. He had chosen it clear-eyed, and so now had she. But the clever man in the city was not wrong to hope. They went up for the studies through that first autumn, and into the winter, Nora and Elliot both, and the specialist made no promises, and Nora made him say so twice. Nothing came back whole. The lost year stayed lost, a summer sitting on the far bank of a river she could not cross. And yet, one frosted morning near the turn of the year, Pip found a new line at the very top of the flower tin wall. In blue ink pressed hard, in a hand that had written it sometime in the night with no memory of doing so, and it was not a question this time, the way the old one had been. It was an instruction, from Nora to the stranger she woke as every dawn, and it said, "The boatman is real, and the tin is true. Go down to the kitchen and choose him. You always do, and it's always right." Underlined twice, the way she underlined only the things she meant. The slippage had not stopped. But something at the very bottom of her, past the shoreline, in the deep channel the tide could not reach, had begun quietly to hold. They were married in the spring, on the water, because they had once argued about whether a boat could be a wedding venue, seriously, with a diagram. And Nora, shown the diagram that morning in her own 3-colored hand, had laughed until she cried, and said any woman who'd draw, that was a woman who meant it. Sunil ran the ferry out into the middle of the bright bay, with the whole harbor aboard, Bridie weeping into her apron, Gil standing braced and steady at his daughter's side, with no iron left in him at all. Nora wore a cornflower in her hair. She did not remember the man waiting for her at the rail, and she walked the length of the deck to meet him anyway, on the strength of one morning, choosing, and when Elliot's voice went to pieces on his vow, it was she who steadied him. A stranger marrying the love of her life, brave without knowing she'd have to be. She wrote mine on the back of his hand in ink that would not wash off for days, and underlined it twice, and pressed his inked hand flat to her heart, and the lake robbed them all blind exactly as it did every single morning. And so it went, and so it goes. Every morning, still, Nora Bellamy forgets him. And every morning, before the heat finds the lake, Elliot Shaw stands on her porch with a paper bag gone soft with butter in one hand and a single blue cornflower in the other, ready to tell her the true thing straight off, and to hold out the tin, and to wait the 11 minutes it takes a brave woman to choose her whole life over again from nothing. He never gets used to her. He promised her that, on a deck, the first thing she ever taught him. People who get used to beautiful things are the saddest people alive, and he is, most mornings, the least sad man on the whole bright water. Because for him it is always, very nearly, the first time she has ever loved him, and there is no getting used to a wonder like that. Real love does not always arrive before the storm. Sometimes it stands on the porch after, in the plain gold light, and knocks again, and asks for nothing but the chance to be worth the bother. One more ordinary, unrepeatable, unforgettable morning. If this story stayed with you, stay with us a while longer. Subscribe and settle in, and I'll have another waiting for you tomorrow, the way Elliot always is, right there on the porch at first light.